painted this in the style of a nostalgic black and white photo for you. Listen. Sankofa. To go back, to go back, to go back to the wisdom, to our riches, our prisms, the power of the bones. Sankofa. To go back to tribal living so no one walks this road alone. To find balance and reciprocity so the winds don't sing the blues and moan. And in our very ancient essence, we grow strong. Sankofa. To go back from the babies to the elders grown. Individualists in our lineage, we need to correct this wrong. Sankofa. To go back to universal love, to reflect the sweet memories of our departed beloved. Sankofa. To go back to correct the earth and change for the fate of what's above. Sankofa. To go back to be a snake charm as smart but as harmless as a dove. Sankofa. Go back to the water and remember the slaughter of those we know not by name, to hear their voices in the rhythms of the waves, and to give thanks to Oru Oshupa for rotating our days. Sankofa. To go back to our ancestors and recover Ijinle ways. Sankofa. To go back to remember our triumphs, our struggles, and how well they switched hats so that we might find our place to keep the legacies intact. Sankofa. To go back to where spiritual intelligence was regarded as fact. Sankofa. To go back to restore the ancient values and rescue the things the untruths love to say we lack. Sankofa. To go back.
Spiritual Sankofa, a stolen legacy.
Greetings, family and friends. I'm your host. I'm Queen Mother Leona, and I'd like to welcome you to the 4th Spiritual Sankofa Show, a stolen legacy. Spiritual Sankofa is presented by the Wellness Department of the Black Gold Nation. The Black Gold Nation's vision is to create physically safe geographic spaces for Black people so that we may better determine our future by controlling the environment in which we live. We're here today to share with you our spiritual journey of the impact of spirituality on mental health. Let's go back. Come with us as we journey through our stolen legacy. With me today on this journey is my sister, Fundi Fabu. Our sister, Fundi Akita, is not with us today. However, we have a guest speaker. Our guest speaker is Dr. Anthony P. Young. If you have any comments or questions, please feel free to put them in the chat and we'll try and answer your questions during our question and answer period. We're not here to convert you, nor to speak down or to degrade your religion. We are here solely and only to enlighten you in hopes of bringing you and others closer to finding out who we are. I'd like to tell you a little bit about our guest speaker, Dr. Anthony P. Young. Dr. Young is the Mental Health Institute Quality Assurance Analyst for the Colorado Department of Human Services. He's also the current president of the Denver Rocky Mountain Association of Black Psychologists. Dr. Young has over 40 years of experience in the area of clinical and forensic psychology and criminal justice. Additionally, he developed the Tubmans Enrichment Program, experiential life skill suspension and expulsion prevention programs for middle school and students of Tubmans Academy. Dr. Young also is was a member, appointed member of the Colorado State Board of Parole, And as a member, Dr. Young implemented evidence-based practices, best practices, and several technological enhancements to ensure public safety and successful transition of returning citizens, that's parolees, to the community. He is the founder and chief entertainment specialist of the Kumba Cultural Collective of Southern Colorado. Dr. Young's personal motto is do your best and let God do the rest. Now, Dr. Young, if you'd like to explain to us who Dr. Young is, however, before you do that, I got a question.
Sure.
On here, it states that you're the chief entertainment specialist of the Kumba Cultural Collective of Southern Colorado. And it says entertainment, not entertainment.
Correct.
Can you tell me what that is? Explain INNER and not ENTER.
Absolutely. When I refer to entertainment, it's about enhancing our minds.
Okay.
It's about being able to delve deeper into who we are individually as well as collectively. And certainly as a people, there's a real need for us to have a better grasp on our history and culture so that we can have more respect and appreciation for who and what we are through space and time. So our program actually teaches Black history, Black culture, as well as engaging in a lot of community talkbacks about issues which are of importance to our community. So entertainment is about enhancing the mind rather than just being entertained, which is what a lot of people do. So we're not against entertainment, but I think it's important that we spend as much time with entertainment as we do with entertainment. And if we got there, we would resolve a lot of our issues.
Okay. And can you tell us who Dr. Young is, or Dr. Tubmans? Which do you prefer?
Either one is fine. Dr. Young or Tubmans, either one I will respond to.
Okay.
Well, first and foremost, I'm the son of Ivory and Doris. I'm the father of Aisha, Jamila, Imani, and Latifa. And I've been a member of this community here in Colorado for about 45 years. I'm from Chicago originally, and I was involved with social activism back in the 60s, and I've continued to engage in different ways throughout the years. So my background is basically mental health. I'm a mental health professional, and I've worked both in as a clinician as well as an administrator for about the last 45 years.
Dr. Young, we're so honored to have you today to be on our show.
Thank you. It's good to be here.
Great deal of our show.
Oh, well, you're welcome. It's always good to be among family.
Yeah, Funifabu, how you doing today?
Yeah, I am happy and elated and very excited today. Good evening, Dr. Tubmans, as I like to call you now that I know how to pronounce your name. And that's how I'm going to refer to you. And I'm glad that we kind of went over that at the beginning so that everybody who's listening will know that when you hear Dr. Young and you hear Dr. Tubmans, we're talking about one and the same person. Okay. So I want to welcome you again, and I'm very honored to have you here as we discuss tonight's topic, the impact of spirituality on mental health. I was saying as we started the show how apropos this is, that this happens to be Mental Health Awareness Month. And I had no idea that it was. So our show is right on time. But before we get going on this episode, I need you to clear up a couple of things for me. Whenever I'm asked the difference between a psychologist and a psychiatrist, all I know to say is one can prescribe medicine.
Okay.
And I'm never sure even then of which one that is. So if you could kind of give us a basic understanding, a basic, kind of layman's understanding of a psychologist and a psychiatrist, as well as what the difference between the two is, and then follow that up with how a person would know when and which one they should seek assistance from.
Okay. Well, first and foremost, the major difference between a psychiatrist and a psychologist is that a psychiatrist is a medical doctor. They go through medical school and they prescribe medication. A psychologist is trained in psychology rather than medicine. Overall, in this country, psychologists do not prescribe medication. Psychologists are trained in psychotherapy and how to address various behavioral, cognitive problems that people may suffer from, as well as many other issues. Psychologists just don't simply work in psychotherapy. There are educational psychologists who work in educational systems. There are industrial organizational psychologists who work in corporate America. There are also neuropsychologists who work primarily in the psychoneurosciences. They may conduct neuropsychological evaluations. And there are people who work in the forensics, and they work in the criminal justice system, not only with the courts, with probation, parole, but also in terms of providing expert witness testimony and also psychological evaluations in both criminal court and civil court. So big difference is that psychiatrists prescribe medication, psychologists don't. Psychiatrists are shrinks. They're known as shrinks because they shrink the brain. Psychologists expand the brain. That's the inside joke, really.
Yeah, I like it.
But when individuals are suffering from anxiety, depression, anger management issues, and any number of what we would call psychological disorders, or just simply human challenges. There's over 1,000 different types of diagnoses that people can suffer from, if you will. And psychologists really focus on helping people develop better skills so that they can function at their optimal level. Oftentimes, people do not need medication. There are some severe disorders which really require medication to help people get back into touch with reality. And for many people, medication can help. Most people don't need medication. Psychiatrists are very expensive, as you would imagine. Going to any MD would be a lot more expensive than going to a counselor or a psychologist or a psychotherapist. So if someone is in need of help, first and foremost, it's important to get the help that you need when you need it. I'm a firm believer that too oftentimes we wait until it's too late. We wait until a problem has gotten so bad that now we're in crisis mode, and that does not help. It's best to be proactive and to address an issue when it becomes bothersome. But let me further qualify what I said by pointing out the fact that mental wellness, rather than mental illness, mental wellness exists on a continuum. On one extreme, we have people who are very adept, they do extremely well, they can only get more better, as Spike Lee would say.
Yeah.
So these are people at the top of the game.
Yeah.
On the other extreme, you have people who are out of touch with reality. And they hear things which are not there. They see things which are not there. They have auditory or visual hallucinations. They may be quite paranoid and afraid in the clinical sense about dangers which are not real. But between these two extremes, most of us exist somewhere in the middle. So what I'm saying is that mental wellness exists on a continuum. You have those who are extremely adept and those who are out of contact with reality. And most of us exist in somewhere in the middle, and all depending upon what factors are impinging upon our wellness, we may vacillate toward one extreme or the other. Someone who loses their job, they may find themselves extremely depressed or anxious, so they'll move closer to the other extreme. Someone who just got promoted or who has just won a lottery might be on another extreme, closer to that. So once again, all depending upon what factors are impinging upon our lives, we may be in need of counseling or psychotherapy. And it's very normal. And my point here is the fact that at some point, everyone will probably suffer from a diagnosable mental challenge or mental disorder. Depression is the most common disorder. I've never met a human being who has never been depressed at all, or anxious or angry, or have had some of these normal human reactions to everyday human experiences. So we have to be able to recognize that at some point, all of us may need help, and it's important to get appropriate help rather than just simply talking to a friend or talking to one's minister or faith-based leader, whomever or whatever that may be called. Because while on one hand, a friend and a member of the faith-based community can do a great job in helping someone make a phone call, to make an appointment.
Okay, Dr. Tubman, say don't go into that, because that is one of our questions. So when we get there,
okay, I'm sorry.
Yeah, you're getting ahead of that. Yeah, because we're going to want to talk about just that. Okay. So just kind of hold that, put a pin in that for right now.
It's there.
Thank you.
Okay. Were you finished, Dr. Young?
Yes, I'll continue along this line later.
Oh, okay.
During the interview.
All right. Talking about psychologists, what is the Black psychological theory? What does it has to do with spirituality?
That's an excellent question. First and foremost, Black / African psychology is based upon the history, traditions, philosophy of people of African descent. And this goes back thousands of years to Kemet and even earlier than that. So when we began to develop what we call African or Black psychology, we went back and we studied who we were as a people before we were enslaved and before we were colonized, to see what our natural state of well-being was. And that's real in contrast to the pathology or illness mentality of European or white psychology. Those of us within the Association of Black Psychologists, we've been trained in Western or European psychology because that's all that's taught at the university for the most part, with only a few exceptions. But we also decided decades ago to create our own model of wellness, what it meant to be a human being and to be of African descent. And we're talking about culturally, not individuals, because our model deals with who we are culturally. And we can always find exceptions to any model. So it does not focus on individual differences. It focuses on what is more representative of our culture as a people. And that's a whole different way of looking at mental wealth, mental wellness, and mental health. For example, when we think about psychology, the root word is actually saku. It's a Kemetic word, which means the spirit, the illumination of the spirit, rather than what is typically talked about in Western or European psychology. It's about the study of human behavior. Real different, studying behavior versus studying spirit, right, and everything that emanates from that spirit, including our personalities.
Okay, thank you for that. And how would you define mental health or and spiritual health?
Well, how I would define it is not to separate mind, body, and spirit, first and foremost,
Okay.
because from an Afrocentric vantage point, we see ourselves holistically. So we don't separate mind, body, and spirit. It's
Right.
one of the same, it's just different aspects of our being. In contrast to white psychology or European psychology, which really separates out mind, body, and spirit. So you have an expert that works on each of those aspects of a human being, whereas culturally and historically, we never separated that into three pieces. We just simply say that all three are interconnected and also interdependent, because we do know that how we feel physically affects how we feel mentally.
Right.
And how we feel mentally can definitely affect how we feel spiritually, and vice versa.
Right.
So there's no disconnect there.
Okay. Yeah, I heard Dr. Clark saying something to that effect earlier today, and how that went in Africa, whereas they were saying they put God in a little house in the church. And
Well,
had him to fit in that house and said it's God's house.
well, and perhaps a good distinction is between religion and spirituality. There's a major distinction, I think, between the two. And I think too oftentimes they're used as synonyms, and they're not the same thing.
Yeah.
And that really confuses a lot of people. When we think about spirituality, we're talking about our relationship with the Creator and our connection with each other as human beings. Whereas when we talk about religion, that's just simply that the practice in which one may practice their connection to the Creator. And spirituality is not institutionalized, whereas religion is.
Okay.
And there are as many religious beliefs as there are people on the planet, because each of us have our own interpretation, our own vantage point about how we choose to experience this religious practice.
Right.
So there's differences among the AMEs or the Catholics or the Baptists or the people who are members of the Church of God in Christ or the Church of Christ, or on and on and on, all seeking to have that connection with the Creator, whatever term we use to define that. So it's quite different. And too often times we find ourselves in conflict with each other because of our religious beliefs. So that's quite convoluted and quite controversial.
Okay. So then to ask, why is spirituality relevant?
Relevant to our mental health?
Right. Why is it relevant to our mental health?
Okay.
And how it fits into mental health.
Okay, certainly. And once again, from an Afrocentric perspective, we have to have balance within our lives, within our beingness. So spirituality is just as important as our physical well-being, and just as important as our mental well-being, because all three are connected. What we find too often times is that people neglect one or two of those aspects of ourselves. You know, we may be quite into our spirituality and neglect the fact that we have to take care of our physical well-being as well. We have to take care of our relationships and our connectedness with other people as a way of staying mentally healthy.
That's a great segue into my next question, Doctor. Excluding, that's a great segue, because that's what the next question is talking about. Okay. So excluding the scientific chemical imbalances, the scientific chemical imbalances of the brain, would you say mental health affects spiritual health? Or the spiritual, is it vice versa? You were about to get into that. Is it vice versa that spiritual health affects mental health? And are they intrinsically linked? Why or why not?
Yes, they are intrinsically linked. And one of the problems with Eurocentric thought is that we get into dichotomous thinking. It's like either or. And the African way of looking at things is it's not either or, it's both and. So that helps to really understand problems, no matter what the problem is, more holistically. So yes, spirituality affects mental health and vice versa. And then we have the physical element and the combination of all three of those. So yes, it's not either or, it's both and. So there's not a linear connection, it's a circular connection.
Oh, shit. Okay, for those of you who are just entering our show, you're watching Spiritual Sankofa Show presented by the Wellness Department of the Black Gold Nation. You can visit our website, and we're speaking on, today we're speaking on the impact of spirituality on mental health. So stay with us as we go further on into our journey. Okay.
Go back to me.
Back to you.
After our identify our quote unquote station break, as we talked about earlier, and as you were mentioning, Dr. Tubmans, okay, mental health awareness is on the rise. And with the recent deaths of Naomi Judd and Regina King's son, I can't think of his name right now, death by suicide, would you say, and I think you did mention this earlier, that mental health crises such as depression, anxiety, and PTSD, post-traumatic stress disorder, or post-traumatic slave syndrome can better be understood through a spiritual lens? Someone needs to mute their mic. I think that's Sanavia. Yeah, okay, thank you. If those crises can be better understood through a spiritual lens, and if so, is there an easier or less complicated way to juxtapose spirituality and mental health in relationship to those health concerns?
Well, let me answer this way. When we think about depression, which is the most common disorder, in fact, that's one which I guess, let's see, I don't know the exact percentage because it does vary from year to year, but it's the most common disorder that people suffer from. And that has a continuum as well. Basic sadness versus those who are chronically depressed and they're catatonic. They're totally incapacitated. So when we think about how spirituality connects with that, if we're unbalanced spiritually, we fail to recognize the connection that not only we have to the Creator, but also to each other. Because oftentimes when people are depressed, they disconnect themselves from other people.
Yeah.
And they lack that spiritual connection because once again, spirituality is not just our connection with the Creator, but also with the creatures, our other human beings. So when we detach ourselves and remove ourselves because of our sadness, because of our depression, we really cannot draw strength from those connections.
Yeah.
And that's a real problem with a depression because people oftentimes isolate themselves and they seek out permanent solutions for temporary problems. And that results in suicide more often than not, because those people who are really serious about suiciding, they won't let you know.
Yeah.
Those who do let you know are calling out for help, which is a healthy sign that they're able to say, look, I'm hurting, I need help. Will someone pay attention to what's going on with me? Versus someone who would just simply leave a note that says, I'm out, I'm gone, because I couldn't deal with the pain.
Well, right there, how can, if a person received a message like that, or perceived that someone was in crisis, how could a person tell if that person was really calling out for help or was just at a beginning stage?
You don't know.
Ah.
You don't know. And that's why if you have to err on the side of caution, because we can't read other people's minds. We don't know whether or not someone is just really talking off the top of their head or if they have lethal intent. So we always take these people serious, with whoever they are, because even if they're hinting at harming themselves, that's serious. Versus someone who tells you, oh, I have a gun. I'm going to suicide on Saturday at 5 o'clock, and there's nothing you can do to stop me. Well, if you happen to be a friend or family member, there's something that you can do to stop them, because anyone who is a danger to themselves, we have a responsibility as people who love them and care about them to help protect them from themselves. And if that means calling a crisis line, that is a good move. No one wants to have the authorities call on them because your business get into the street, so to speak. But if you don't help a person gain the help that they need when they need it, chances are we would just simply have to be regretting not having made that move and having to attend the funeral instead.
So then how can you tell the difference between a depressed call and someone experiencing anxiety?
Well, it's best, first and foremost, to either get them in, have them call the crisis hotline. They can help sort through this. Oftentimes there are crisis centers or what do you call it? Some states have mobile crisis units. So being able to get someone in that way is one type of intervention. Another one would be to help them make an appointment to see a therapist. Now,
Dr. Young,
yeah.
You and Dr. Tubmans say, you and I both know, if I'm sitting at home and my girlfriend calls me and she is in anxiety, and I tell her, girl, call the crisis hotline.
Oh, no.
Okay,
no,
so
not like that.
In a real life, real time. I mean, I know if I was at work,
not like that.
Or if I was sitting in a classroom, I know that. But I'm talking about if it is a family, and I tell them that call the crisis hotline, or I'm gonna call it. How would I handle that? Yeah, I mean, because the chances are, if I'm in a classroom or if I'm at work or something, I would probably do that. I would probably call the supervisor and say, "Hey, look, y'all better get EAP down here," or something like that.
Okay,
but
well,
just in a real time, everyday situation where this friend may have just been, how do I mean, because the minute I say call the crisis helpline, you know where that's gonna go.
Okay, well, that's a good example, but a better approach would be to ask the person, exactly what have they done to address their depression. How long have they been feeling this way? Have they considered talking to someone about it who can help them? I wouldn't go straight to contact a crisis line. It's like being able to really connect and to empathize with this person who you care about, because if they see you as being empathetic and someone who really want the best for them, they might be more willing to listen to you. And kind of easing up on the issue about, look, let's make an appointment with someone, with a professional who can help you sort this out. Okay, I'm your friend. I can't do it for you, but let's get with a professional who can help you. My best example is that if your friend breaks their leg, you'll do your best to encourage them to see a physician to get that bone reset, right? If someone is in a crisis mode psychologically, it's important that they get professional help. So being able to encourage them in that direction is very important, because in our community, particularly in the Black community, we have this stigma about mental health or mental illness. No one wants to be seen as being crazy or as being weak. And Black men are the worst about seeking help. We are definitely much less likely to seek help than African-American women.
Yeah.
And that's because of this gender stigma about, men are tough, we just have to suck it up and bear it, whatever it is. To seek help means that we're weak. That's been the stereotype that we've been socialized into believing. And it's a lie, because men and women suffer from the same emotions. We may express the emotions differently at times, but it's the same set of DNA that makes us human. So being able to really encourage your friend or family member to really let them know that it's okay, that they're not weak, that they're not, that they're not crazy to seek help, and that all of us need help at some point. Even the strongest person among us at some point is going to need help.
Yeah.
This is a show on the spiritual impact on mental health. How would you approach that from a spiritual standpoint? Yeah, and I'm not referring to religion. You know how they say, go pray
Right.
about it, or you need to pray. What is spirituality's impact on that depression and anxiety? I mean, if you're going to come at it from the sense, the show is on the spiritual
Yes.
impact on that. Where would you bring in spirituality, or would you?
Well, it depends. It depends upon where the person is at. We know that some people are more in tune with their spirituality than others. And most of us can kind of pick up on whether or not they're just simply religious, or if they have more of a spiritual orientation. Now, if someone is religious, what I do, I use their belief system to help ground them in getting the help that they need, whatever their faith-based tradition is. So we validate that and we say, look, whatever you believe, let's use this as a way to help strengthen you. And some people will be more attuned to that because of how we're socialized with institutionalized religions. It doesn't matter if we're Baptist or Catholic or Lutheran or what have you. Most of us can kind of identify with that on some level. In contrast to working with someone and getting them more in tune with meditating, and to getting them to understand their connectedness to the Creator, and also their connection to other people who are human, using that as a way to draw strength. Too oftentimes what we find is that people tend to ignore their own spirituality, and they focus more on religion.
Yeah, and then it seems as though, just suicidal thoughts and stuff like that it's almost like a hit or miss. Kind of like, I'm just thinking about, I recently watched this documentary on this young man who was in prison, and he was in, what you call that, the box for a long time.
Solitary confinement.
Solitary consignment for a long time, and it messed him up.
Mm-hmm.
After he got out, he went to therapy a lot. They put him on medication. They did all kinds of things. He had tried to kill himself, and they put him in the hospital about that, and he got out. He was doing fine. He had a real good counselor who was crazy about him, who tried to help him a great deal. But when he decided to kill himself, he just walked to his mother and told her, how you doing today? She said, oh, I'm good. He said, okay. Went to his room, hung himself, and jumped out the window with the noose on his neck.
Mm-hmm.
So it seemed like it's a hit or miss in there.
Well,
somehow this guy had a lost connection.
But there you go. That's a good point, because when people don't acknowledge or as you would say, lose that connection, lose that spiritual connection, they cannot draw strength from it.
Lost that.
So one of the approaches certainly would be to help people begin to reconnect spiritually. And what that looks like is real different for different people, all depending upon what their orientation is about spirituality, because we don't operate from the same definition oftentimes. So finding out what that means to that person is important, and helping them to reconnect with that so they can draw strength from it.
Yeah.
Otherwise, for that disconnection, that is a very bad sign from my perspective, because once again, we have to have that balance mentally, spiritually, physically.
So then when I can walk away with this is that I'm hearing you say that is very well could be that your spiritual beliefs or a person's spiritual beliefs can support their mental health.
Exactly.
Okay.
And being able to really use that as a source of strength. In fact, one of the questions I typically ask people is, where do you draw your strength from? Some people may say, oh, I pray. Some people may say, oh, I read. Some people may say, oh, I meditate. Some might even say, I really take time to get in touch with myself, mentally, physically, and spiritually, and being well grounded. So once again, being able to identify where a person is at, and using that as a way to help strengthen them. So if someone has a weak spiritual connection, or maybe a poor understanding of their own spirituality, perhaps helping them to explore that can begin to go ahead.
No, I was gonna say, you mean to explore that going inward,
Yes.
to look for their strength as opposed to reaching outward or placing that strength on a force or something outside of themselves.
Yes, yes. And of course,
Okay, well, go ahead.
many of us will recognize the fact that that spiritual force is within us. It's not necessarily out there. It's here, first and foremost, because of the manner in which human beings were created. You know, we're part of the creator. That creator is within us, regardless of what our faith tradition may be. You know, but if we keep looking for something coming from the sky, that refers more to religion than spirituality.
Right. Yeah.
Well, and since we are really addressing mental health in the African American community, there's this guy, Howard Denson, who is a Harvard MBA, who rather than go to Wall Street, he chose to devote 35 years seeking to identify what it is that constrains the empowerment of African Americans. He says that understanding the impact of cultural intergenerational trauma is essential to the understanding of how the legacy of the enslavement of African Americans and Africans of the diaspora affect the mental health of this group of people today. Would you say that's an accurate analogy? And so can you kind of elaborate on that for us?
Well, I'm going to say that that's half of the answer. Understanding our trauma is very important, but also understanding that our healing is also in our genes, not just our trauma.
Right.
Our resilience exists in our genes, not just the trauma. So once again, it's not either or, it's both and, because we have both of those going on within us. We are a resilient people, but we have been traumatized. And the trauma does not negate the fact that we are still a resilient people, because we're having this conversation on May 18th, 2022, when the odds were against our ancestors because the destroyers tried to wipe us out, not just physically, but mentally as well, and spiritually. So being able to understand that this trauma that we have experienced these last 500 plus years is a grain of sand in the ocean of time since Black folks have existed. It's a very important grain of sand, but that is not our totality. We have a lot more strength to draw from than the pain that we suffer from right now. But too often times we focus on the pain and the trauma rather than saying, look, our ancestors have been around from the beginning of human beings. We built civilizations. for thousands and thousands of years. And here we are these last 500 years, which once again is a drop of water in the ocean of time as far as Black folks have been around. We have to be able to really keep all this in perspective. The pain is in our genes, but as well as the healing and the resilience. So the brother who did his study with, it's wonderful, but once again, that's half of it. The other half is the part that we don't usually talk about. And that's all of the resilience that are built into our genes as well.
Yes.
And that genius within our genes.
Yes.
So it's
So
both
then
of those. Go ahead.
that would mean speaking to the strength perspective of our people, as opposed to so much of the overbearance of the trauma. I mean, while the trauma needs to be healed, are you saying that if we go in spiritually, we can bring out how resilient we are?
Yes.
And that would be the other half of the whole?
Absolutely. Absolutely. We have to draw from that resilience so that we heal. If we don't draw from that, we will never heal, from my perspective. Okay.
That's where our strength lies, and that's where you see our power.
And that is why the colonizers, the destroyers, did all that they could to attempt to wipe out our spirituality.
Mhm.
They did all that they could to physically and mentally break us, but they could never totally conquer our spirit. And that's why we're having this conversation today, because that conquest never happened. And it's antithetical to who we are as human beings, to be conquered spiritually. We had to adopt and embrace their religious practices. But spiritually, we still maintain that connection with our Creator. And that's something that they can never destroy. We could just simply abandon it or give it up, but that is in our DNA.
That's why we started the show Spiritual Sankofa, to go back, and reconnect with our past. And like I said, they could not stomp out all of it, because in all of the spiritual faiths, I guess you want to call it, a spiritual lived traditions, the Candomblé, the Ifa, the Yoruba religion, and all of that was still hidden inside of our oppressors' religion. They couldn't stamp it all the way out, you know what I mean? Because there are still some traditions that bleed over into their religious practices. And that was the ingenious of our ancestors, to keep this stuff alive. But, prior to the past decade, researchers, health professionals, as like we were just talking about, as well as the faith communities, separated spiritual health from mental health. And like you said, African people, the Indigenous Knowledge Society has always emphasized that life is interconnected. And to be fully human, the holistic development of a person must be addressed.
Absolutely.
Now, currently, the health industry, as well as faith, communities are beginning to take this holistic approach to understanding the connection. Thus, we have this mental health awareness month. Why was there a reluctance in the past to make this connection, and why now are they more accepting, they being, these industries, the health industries, why are they more accepting now of a more holistic approach to mental wellness?
Well, first and foremost, the mental health industry, as it is, has been dominated by a Eurocentric mentality, a Eurocentric worldview. And because of that hegemony, that cultural dominance of European thinking in the mental health industry and the mental health professions, that has really caused this separation to persist, because that's part and parcel of why we have this mind, body, spirit separation. That's very Eurocentric. So that was embedded within European psychology when it was developed. In fact, that goes back to 1879 in Wundt's laboratory in Germany when white psychology first started. Whereas African spirituality, African psychology, if you will, or psycho, started thousands of years ago when we talked about the illumination of the spirit.
African psycho?
Psycho. That's the name.
Psycho.
Okay, I mean, I'm not familiar with that term. That's why I just.
Okay, that's a Kemetic term, and that was the term used to describe the psyche. Okay, it's called psycho. And of course, the Greeks adulterated the word, and then psychology came out of that. But the origins talked about the illumination of the spirit, not the study of human behavior, which is where the Europeans went off, because according to their worldview, everything can be measured. So if it cannot be measured, it doesn't exist. That's why they have such a hard time with spirituality. Europeans can do religion, but they cannot do spirituality because it cannot be measured. And it's something very, very abstract. And Sister Dr. Maruma Ani talked about the fact that that because people of European descent, and she's an anthropologist, cultural anthropologist, she says that what they have lacked has been spirituality. And that's something that they just simply cannot obtain. That's part of the great divide between people of African descent and people of European descent, because they have lost their spiritual connectedness. So they can get deep into religion, but they lack that spiritual connection with not just the creator, but with other human beings. That's why they could perpetuate such violence and such atrocities through slavery, because they do not see that spiritual connection, because they don't have it.
So that was their reluctance to combining the two.
Well, it's not in their nature. It is not in their nature. Now, of course, by doing holistic practice, they can now commodify and monetize a holistic approach. But yeah,
that was what I want to know. Why now? Because it's like all of a sudden, now that's all they talk about, a holistic approach to mental wellness. So it is because they can now measure that, and they believe.
They can monetize it.
Okay.
They can have integrated healthcare and have behavioral health and medical health in the same office, and charge insurance companies accordingly.
Man, they are atrocious, aren't they? I mean, when I say that, I mean, they find a way to capitalize on everything, and then we buy into it, not realizing that we had it first.
Exactly. And let me go one step further.
Sure.
Those of us who have studied Dr. J. Carruthers and Dr. Ben Jacomum and Dr. Chancellor Williams and Dr. John Henry Clark and all of the rest have traced the fact that what we call institutionalized religion itself today really has its origins in the ancient spiritual and religious practices of the ancient Africans. But what happened was, particularly with Christianity, Europeans, or as they're called now, actually went into Kemet, studied our practices, took it back to where they were, changed it a bit, then reintroduced that that faith back to us. But the origins are African, but they've been changed so much and injected with the European culture that it does not really resemble the original practices of the ancient Africans. And now, of course, it's been labeled Christianity or Buddhism or Judaism or Islam, when really all of those have their roots in ancient Africa. In fact, there's a book by Charles Finch, who's a historian and MD, brother, really talked about these ancient origins of these institutionalized religions. But once again, they've been changed so much and injected with European and, if you will, Arabic culture that it's really hard to see the connection with the ancient African practices and belief systems. But there are many scholars among us who have done the work. And I would encourage all of us to look at the work and then come to your own understanding of that work and that research and see if you come up with the same conclusions. They spend a lifetime studying these issues. And while all of us have opinions, and all of our opinions can be valued, but these are the people who actually did the work.
Okay, we've talked about a number of subjects during our discussion. Dr. Tubmans, can you tell us a bit about your spiritual journey and your trip to Kemet?
Yes, in fact, I have some photos I can share with you if you allow me to share your screen. I can pull up some photos. I've located them for you. My spiritual journey was something that started when I was very young. My mother, who was a single parent with a 6th grade education, always told my brothers and I, I'm the youngest of 3 sons, that we needed to go to church. So she sent us off to Sunday school every Sunday. Okay, and that was cool because the Sunday school had cookies and Kool-Aid. So as a 4-year-old, that was wonderful for me. Of course, it also gave her a chance to have us out of the house because she stayed home while we went. But at a very young age, I began to learn about religion. But it wasn't until I was in 8th grade that I began to really question a lot of the beliefs that I was indoctrinated into, such as I was baptized in the Baptist church, and our minister bought a brand new car every year. Now, we were living in the public housing project on the south side of Chicago, and I wondered, as a young guy, how was it that we could live in poverty and the minister drove a new car every year? He would trade it in, get a new Cadillac. So I began to kind of question religion at that time and how much I began to see the contradictions between what was being said versus how people were behaving, particularly those who were clergy. When I was when I was a senior in high school, I had a chance to actually begin to study world religion. Myself and a group of 14 other young people from the south side of Chicago were chosen to go to Taizé, France, to study at the International Council of Youth in Taizé, France, and to actually study world religion. It was a paid trip. It's a long story about how we got there, but to make a long story short, these were young African Americans from the south side of Chicago that had a chance to go to France and study in the monastery, in the ecumenical monastery. And one of the issues, the main issue that was being studied that year in 1971 was man's inhumanity to man. So there were people from all over the planet except the Iron Curtain countries, as they were called then, because the Soviet Union was in existence as such. We actually had discussion groups. There were small groups of about anywhere from 10 to 15 of us, all from different parts of the planet. And we talked about man's inhumanity to man from our various religious, faith-based traditions. And out of that, I just became more and more curious about how could it be with these countries which claim to be Christian could perpetuate such atrocities across the planet. And then again, the same was true of those folks who were from Islamic countries, because they definitely had their own issues about how people were being enslaved there. And also the Asian members of our group. So it just raised more questions to me about how religion had been used to condone such evil things. So I began to just question that a bit. And I began to also study on my own more about the origins of the various faith-based traditions, seeking to explain how we could have people who claim that they believe in God do such ugly, horrible things to other human beings. I don't care if it was sexism or racism or what have you. It was the same evilness that I kept seeing. It kept turning up in the media and in my everyday life, watching other people. And it was at that point that I began to read more about our history and culture, because in 8th grade, I began to really study Black history. But in high school and in college, I was able to do it more. It was all self-study. And I came across some of the works of Dr. Asa Hilliard and Dr. Naeem Akbar, and of course, later, Dr. Francis Cress Welsing. And all that began to just enlighten me about different perspectives about how I can understand not just the social conditions, but also that spirituality, which was basically lacking within our government and in many places I had been. So it was out of that I just continued to study more and more on my own. And now that we have YouTube, we have a free resource available to us where a lot of these scholars have the lectures. So I began to buy more books and to actually do more self-study. So that was my spiritual journey, which I'm still on. And I hope to never get off of it.
I say, well, can I have any closing comments that you would give to us that we could take away with us?
Yeah, my closing comment would be that as a people, we are resilient. We have to be sure to draw strength from our history and our culture, and all encompassed within that is our spirituality. We have to be able to have that connection as a source of strength. Otherwise, nothing else really matters. And well, that's what I would say. We really have to be better grounded spiritually, historically, and culturally about our own people. And that in itself will add to our mental health and our ability to cope with all of the various challenges that we're being confronted with, as well as to understand how our history and culture allows us to see this madness through a whole different lens. So that's what I would say in closing. There's a lot more I could say, but I know our time is out. So thank you very much for having me. I really appreciate the opportunity to share with you, and stay well and stay blessed.
Thank you so much. We never did see those pictures in
I can show you some. I'm sorry. So if I'm able to share, I'm going to pull them up. Okay.
Kind of take us on a personal trip to Kemet.
I can do that. Oh, here you go. So this is a picture that I took. Can you see this?
Yes.
Good. I was several miles away from the Great Pyramid at Giza, and also quite a distance away from the Sphinx. So being able to capture this photo really was important to me, because we know that the Sphinx was found to have been built over 7,000 years before the Great Pyramid, which really means that, in contrast to what the Europeans were saying, these two were not contemporaries. They were built thousands of years apart from each other. I'm going to go through some of these very quickly. Now, there's another picture of the Sphinx. I took lots of photographs. Oh, let me go back to this one. This is Dr. Asa G. Hilliard III. And if any of you ever have the opportunity to get on YouTube, look at some of his lectures about Kemet, ancient Egypt. I think you would find it just fascinating.
I love his lectures on Kemet. I've seen a number of them.
And once again, they're free. There's an African proverb that goes something like this: not to know is bad, not to want to know is worse. And there's all kinds of free information that we can have access to 24 hours a day. So there's no excuse. Okay.
Ride a camel?
I sure did. I rode the hump.
Okay.
Ah, this is a photo of the Valley of the
Oh,
Kings
there you go
in
down.
Luxor. And let's
That's
see,
a tomb,
that's
is
a
it?
tomb. Yes, it goes down several feet underground.
And that's where they have all the pictures, where all the pictures of the people in there are Black.
Yes. And once again, these pictures are thousands of years old, thousands of years before the Europeans came down to conquer.
What's amazing to me is how they state those pictures are the people, the color of the people are Black on those pictures, and that has sustained all these thousands of years.
Yes, absolutely. And they knew something back then that we still don't quite understand, how they were able to create such paint that has lasted for thousands of years.
Yeah, that's what I'm talking about, how they did that. And I keep having to get my house painted.
Right on.
Hey guys, I hate to interrupt this beautiful tour here, but we've got our guests down and we do have some questions. We need to get to our question and answer. And hey, we will have you back, Dr. Young, Dr. Tubmans, and we'll get a chance to look at all of these pictures.
Okay, and I will actually develop a slide presentation that has the most relevant pictures that I would like to share with you rather than some of the other ones.
We would love to see them, but so that our audience can get back focused on the impact of spirituality on mental health, we want to cut to the question and answers.
Sure.
Okay.
Brother Tamani, are you there? He did message me. If you can give me back
I'm here. You need something?
The question, we're going to the question and answers. You want me to do that? Can you give us back the screen, brother, Dr. Anthony?
Yes, I'm going to, let's see. How do you do that? Okay.
While he's doing that, Tamani, did you want me to give the questions to Dr. Tubmans, or?
Yeah, yes, ma'am. You can read them to him one by one. That'd be good.
Okay, there you go.
Okay, these questions have come in from our audience, our listening audience, and I'm sure they're directed specifically to you, Dr. Tubmans.
Okay.
Number one, is attending church a form of therapy?
Well, yes and no, and let me explain that. Therapy, or anything that is, or I should say, therapy is anything that is helpful. Anything that is therapeutic can be helpful. So for some people it can be. For other people it could be punishment. So it depends upon one's perspective. And also what one is seeking. You know, if one is seeking to be helped and healed in some way, it can certainly help. Whereas some people have been abused by the church or by the mosque. So it depends upon the person. Does that make sense to you?
Yes, it does, because there is a saying going around in a lot of the communities when people are adjusting or going from religion to spirituality, and they'll say the church is the only place that shoots us wounded. You know. So,
well, it can be, because there are some great people who attend the various faith-based temples and churches and mosques, but there are also a lot of wounded, evil people as well.
Right.
Sometimes they're in leadership position.
Right. So, right. Our next question is, how is culture developed, given the fact that our African culture was taken from us and that we seem to like a culture that's progressive, supportive, and reaffirming? How do we get that back? How do we rebuild?
Okay, well, let me start off with saying that what white people attempted to do during the enslavement process was to wipe out our culture. They could not do that because our spirituality is part of our culture. We just ended up having to transform and translate and adapt our practices to this horrible environment that our ancestors had to live under and endure. So how do we get back to who we are naturally as a people? We have to do what Hakim Mahabudi said some years ago. Those of you on this Zoom call might know that he's the publisher and editor of Third World Press out of Chicago. He said we have to create an African mindset in the European space. America is a European space. We have to study ourselves so that we gain an appropriate understanding, respect, and appreciation of our history and culture. We have to engage in self-study. Nobody can do that for us, and nobody can keep us from doing it. That's the work that we have to do. And part of that will actually encompass our spirituality, because you cannot talk about people of African descent without also understanding our spirituality and studying that as well, because it's part and parcel of the same thing. Spirituality is part of our culture, just like music is part of our culture. You know, just like mathematics and sciences are part of our culture. But once again, it's something that we have to make the time to do. And it's not an easy thing, because we have so many distractions that keep us from taking the time or making the time to study ourselves. And I will also say, be mindful of the scholars that you study, because there's a lot of bogus stuff out there. I was going to say something else.
Yeah, a lot of people trying to make money too.
Yeah, they're out there written by white folks and Negroes who just simply embrace that Eurocentric mentality and use their frame of reference to explain us. So you have to be very mindful of the sources that you read, because some of it is just the same regurgitation of the lies about Black folks in our culture. So I listed earlier.
Well, can you hold that thought? Because you must have really, we got a lot of questions. This is the first time we've had a bunch of questions. Okay. You must have really sparked the interest in our audience, because I have about 4 more questions for you, and we're already like over time. So,
okay, what I would like to send you is a bibliography. If you can get these to the people who are asking for it,
sure.
If they put their email in the Zoom, I'll send that to you or Brother Tamani, and you can use that. It's a wonderful way to begin with very credible resources.
You can get that to Queen Mother, and she'll get it to us, because your next question, I would like to answer as many of these questions as we can.
Okay.
The next question to you is that you stated that there are major distinctions between spirituality and religion.
Yes.
What are some of the major distinctions?
Okay, the biggest distinction is that spirituality is individual. Each of us have a relationship with the Creator, and we can explore that and experience that if we want to. Some people deny that. Another aspect of our spirituality is our connection to each other. Okay, and that is also individual, because as an individual, we can experience each other. So that connection that we have allows us to have that collective connection with one another. Religion is group. Spirituality is individual, because no one has let me put it this way. No one is responsible for your spiritual well-being other than you. No one is responsible for your spiritual salvation other than you. When we talk about religion, that's people coming together and practicing rituals in a collective manner, for the most part. And there are some things which occur on an individual basis, but for the most part, when we think about religion, it's something which has also been monetized. It is something which has been built into the social structure dominated by white people. Okay, so major difference there. Where spirituality is something that we experience on an individual basis, based upon our connection with the Creator. Okay.
Okay, we're not going to get through all of these questions. We just really aren't. And I apologize to those of you on our audience if we didn't get to your question. We will get with Dr. Tubmans and get an answer for you.
Okay.
And I'd do better saying Dr. Young, huh? Rather than slaughtering.
Okay.
And get the answer to you because we really have to stick to a time. But there is one last one. Do you think having a strong spiritual base and understanding in the Black community could help eliminate some of our people's mental health issues?
Without a doubt. Yeah. Without a doubt. Absolutely. Because when we suffer from spiritual impairment, it affects everything else. And that's where we have been sorely lacking, because too often times religion has been used as a tool of oppression. Okay, and as a people, we have used it for the most part as a tool of our liberation, but yet we find ourselves divided against each other based upon religion. So, and lastly, there's nothing good or bad about religion. It's just a matter of how it's used. It's a tool. It can be a very useful tool, or it can be very destructive. And we know about the destruction. All we have to do is look at our history, and our current situation really speaks to that very well. So lastly, once again, it depends what it's used for. And if it's used for the right purposes, for healing and helping, wonderful. If not, it's just something else that needs to be avoided.
Yeah, like we say, don't throw the baby out with the bathwater in all cases. Okay, the chat has just been going crazy down here because somebody said, please, please, please ask him if the healing is in our genes, how do we get, and they capitalize and put in quotes, to that healing?
Excellent question. And I'll tell you, the best way to start the healing is through self-study and attend the emotional emancipation circles, because that's what it's about, being able to begin that healing process that we do collectively. Our healing is not something which is necessarily individual, done on an individual basis. We heal collectively. We know that mental health, spiritual health is something that we can gain collectively. We don't need to do it by ourselves. Our strength has always been in coming together and engaging in the work necessary to heal our community, while at the same time healing ourselves individually. But this is collective work.
Well, okay, thank you, Dr. Anthony. I'm getting bombarded. This is new. This is new for me. All of a sudden, my dear brother Tubmans is kind of like a little bit under the weather. Kind of caught him. He needs to get some rest, and this is new to me. You know, it's nothing like being thrown in the water and saying you better swim. And I don't swim, but I'm not gonna drown either. So I appreciate your going along with this. Queen Mother, do you have any closing remarks or anything that you would like for us to
I'd like to
go away with?
I'd like to thank the audience, and I'd like to thank Dr. Tubmans for bringing us all this information. We kept telling the audience that we had some very special people that could come with good information, and you helped us to tell the truth.
Ashe.
I appreciate you. And for all of you who showed up, thank you so much for showing up.
I would just like to say once again, thank you to Dr. Anthony for being the wonderful guest that you are, knowledgeable guest. You cleared up one thing for me. I had half of it right. One of them, between the psychologist and the psychiatrist, one of them right medicine. Now I have a better explanation. And I want to thank the audience. Like I said, this has been Spiritual Sankofa, Our Stolen Legacy. Tonight's topic was the impact of spirituality on mental health. and is sponsored by the Wellness Department of the Black Gold Nation. Like I said, I kind of like got thrown in the water, so I don't have the tape for the announcements, but I will encourage you to go to www.blackgoldnation.com, where you will find all of our announcements and things that are coming along. Again, I would like to close with two things that our brother Tamani, our leader, our fearless leader, likes to say is no one can do everything, but if everyone does something, everything will get done. And I may screw this next one up because I'm used to saying it a certain way, but there is nothing, absolutely nothing more sacred than the liberation, empowerment, and advancement of African people. Because if African people don't make it, you don't make it, I don't make it, don't none of us make it. So we will look forward to seeing you all here again the third Thursday in June, because this podcast is every third Thursday. Thank you and good night, everybody.
Good night.
Good night, everybody. Thanks again, Dr. Tubmans.
You're welcome. Stay
All
well.
of it. Bye-bye.
Thanks, everybody, for joining.